I just want to take a minute and thank everybody for all the support, for listening, financially contributing to me in 2024. 2025 is going to be a great year. But I also want to take 1 second and let people know that I am self supported. If interested in financially contributing to what I'm doing, I have a Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, monthly subscriptions through Local, Patreon. I also have Zelle, and I have a P.O. Box. All of the information is in every single episode of my show notes, and can't wait for 2020, more of 2025, and more conversations ahead. Thank you. Karl, it's Monday, March 3rd, and I will put this conversation up on Monday, March 3rd, even if it's 11:59 p.m. tonight, because there's so much going on that you can't, and I say this all the time, but it's you can't wait with any
Well,
of this.
I hope the processing works because we've had a couple times that it's been a little hinky when it goes through your systems.
Yeah, that was
I'm
the
not quite
weirdest
sure
thing.
why.
That was the weirdest thing. That one time, the video just froze, and I didn't see it until after. And at that point, I had even emailed Zoom, which is an utter waste of time because it's not like they're gonna.
They they don't know, and yeah. Well, the funny thing about that is when I do these things, if I don't run them live, then I pull them in, I tape them, and then I toss them through DaVinci Resolve. But the problem is that, okay, now unless I'm going to sit there and watch the whole thing, I don't know if there's a problem halfway through it until it gets up onto Rumble. Okay, and then they process it. Well, I'm on a cable modem. I don't have direct fiber. So the upload rate is not real fast. Now, that's going to go away here sometime middle of the year because power companies bringing gigabit symmetrical in at a cheaper price than what I'm paying for cable. So I will be able to blow very large video files up at places like Rumble in a matter of 1 or 2 minutes as opposed to taking half an hour, which will be really nice.
That would be
But
nice. So
yeah,
so, do you? I want to since we're talking about platforms.
coffee.
Curious. What happened? What's going on with you in X? First of all,
Okay,
you were in
so
timeout. You were in timeout for a bit.
well, that's okay. So that happens fairly regularly and fairly repeatedly, right, to quite a number of people. Um, the reason I was put in timeout was that I said, "Go fuck yourself with a cactus." This was deemed violent speech.
You wrote the word.
Now,
You actually wrote the word "fuck."
yes.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I didn't know if there
I,
was an asterisk with the U or so. I know. I don't.
oh
That's what I
no,
was asking.
no, but I mean, by the way, Elon has said, "Go fuck yourself" many times on the platform. Okay. Um, I, I didn't say I'll fuck you with a cactus. That would be a threat. Okay. I said go fuck yourself with a cactus. Um, and so that bang, you're out. I appealed it. They said, oh no, that really did break the rules. All right. Well, and it's not the first time that they have taken umbrage. And by the way, part of it, the other part of the speech, and this is part of the problem I have with these guys. Every social media site does this. They won't tell you exactly what it is that you said that offended them. Okay. The other part of the statement was that, by the way, Zelensky's a dictator. Was that the hate speech? That was the other part of the tweet. Okay. Now, why did I say Zelensky was a dictator? Because the conversation that I was replying to was in the context of him suspending elections, which he did. And this, to me, is the defining difference between a representative republic and a dictatorship, especially in a time of war. Not only do you not get an exception in a time of war, that's the time that it really matters because you as the leadership are not the ones over there getting your asses blown off. The guys that you're drafting or have volunteered, in the case of Ukraine, it's a draft, are the ones getting their asses blown off. And as a result, when the time comes, the people of your country have the right to say, we're done with this shit. And the way they do that is by throwing you out of office. All right? If you do not allow them to do that, you're a dictator. That's the end of the conversation. Now, we had this debate in the United States several times, including during the Civil War, and our elections went forward. The Civil War, of course, was on our own soil, and it was our guys that were getting shot at and blown up on both halves of the conflict, okay? And Lincoln was reelected. So the people of the United States decided during the war that they were willing to continue to prosecute it. Okay, that's what a democracy is. And there is no time that it is more important than when people are being killed as a result of the political decisions you've made. There's simply no greater excuse, no greater time that you have an obligation as a leader to obtain the consent of the people that you rule over to continue that sort of a thing. It just isn't. It's not complicated. Okay? So I refuse to delete the tweet. I refuse to take it down. And as a result, the account stayed suspended. Well, now, the fun part about this is the other thing that all these social media platforms do is they will not tell anybody why you were suspended or even that you were suspended. So if you looked at my profile, you could not see that I was suspended. The only reason you knew was that you DM'd me and I had your email address. And so I emailed you back. I could see your DM because it came across my phone, but I couldn't reply to it. I had to consent to deleting the tweet in order to be able to reply to you. So you can communicate in one direction with no indication that anything's wrong, except that I've fallen off the face of the earth or I'm dead. But one of the reasons that social media sites and others will never tell anybody else why is because if they're lying, you could sue them for libel, because that's defamation, right? And you could nail them to the wall if they were to communicate that to somebody else. And if they were to do that, you could take it before a judge, because now you've been publicly defamed. Well, so they're too cute by half. So while I'm sitting there thinking about this, I'm like, okay, obviously, eventually, I want to clear my timeline and just tell Twitter to go stick it. But for right now, let's do some analysis. Supposedly, I have approximately 10,000 people that follow me. Supposedly. And every day when I get up, it used to be that my article of the day automatically posted because Twitter had an API that you could hook into. I wrote a little piece of code that automatically posted my one article every day. It's all it did. It was not used to spam anything. That's what it did. After Elon bought the place, he changed that and made that a subscription development feature. You had to pay him in order to be able to use the API. I'm not doing that. All right? I don't get any value out of that that's worth anything. All it does is save me the time of clicking on the link and posting it in a box. Right? I mean, what I'm going to pay him so I don't have to spend 30 seconds a day? That's stupid. So that, even though my software still has a capability to do it, didn't work anymore. But so I took a step back and I said, okay, I got this many followers. I go through my web analytics and I say, last month, before all this stuff started, January, how many times did somebody click on a link on Twitter and read one of my articles? Because that's part of the information you get if you run your own web server. And the answer is that across the entire 30 days, there were 6,000 whole clicks off Twitter or X that came into my page. 6,000. That's nothing. If I've got 10,000 followers and they're all humans and half of them use the site every day, I should get 6,000 daily inward links. Why don't I? Because the algorithm buries my articles, because they have external content. They go somewhere else. It's not because Elon hates me, and it isn't because he doesn't like my content. It's because the entire point of his site is to keep your eyes on his site. Anything that takes away from that, takes somebody onto another site, gets demoted by the algorithm automatically. Well, here's the problem. My site's a forum. You can respond to posts, you can add your commentary or whatever have you, and people put links to Twitter in there all the time. So Elon gets a great deal of traffic back from me. He doesn't pay me for it. Why in the hell would I do that? So I didn't. I went into the configuration on my system and I blackballed his site. So anybody that attempts to link anything on X, it gets treated as if it's a swear word and you get dots. Okay? So no one can link anything on X from my system anymore. And they never will be able to again. Because I get no value from him. He is, the ban aside, he is deliberately demoting the ability of people to see my material. Well, then why in the hell would I give him anything in return? All right, the only way that there's an exchange of free ideas is when people are getting something approximately equal in value from the conversation on both sides. If by subterfuge you are censoring people, you're just putting enough out there that people don't realize that you're burying all of it and none of it ever gets through. Just leave enough out there that if people go look for it, they'll find it. But it doesn't show up in your For You feed unless you go, 15 pages down and, oh, there it is, there it is. But where it's not is where it ought to be, which is in chronological order right up near the top. Because if that was in fact happening for the people that were allegedly followers, those link backs would have been there, and they're not. And I went back and I looked at it for the last several months, and it's consistent. So this is a pattern. And if you're a creator and you're on a social media site, I assure you, Facebook is doing the exact same thing. Okay, so's Instagram, so's everybody else. The problem is, if you're a creator and you've got content on somewhere like Rumble or YouTube, you have no way to see this. You can't see where the inbound connections are coming from. You don't know who's doing that. You don't have access to those web logs. You don't see the references. My software, on the other hand, yes, I do. Okay. So, because I run it on my own metal, I run it on my own hardware and with my own code. And so I know exactly where all of the connections are coming from. And the facts are that I get no value. So basically, if I spend no time because I have an automated robot that posts my stuff up from an API or whatever, then it costs me nothing. Fine. But why would I engage on his platform? I don't get anything out of it. Why do I want to take 20 minutes, an hour, half an hour out of my day? I don't get anything out of that. No, nobody clicks back on my stuff. They don't actually read my content. So what am I doing? Masturbating? I got better things to do. I'll pet the cat. But this is not limited to X, okay? The people that believe that somehow social media helps their content curation, you're wrong. It doesn't. And if you have access to the analytics, you can see it. But if you're on if you're not doing your own distribution, then you don't have that data at that level. I am doing my own distribution, so I do have it, and it's very simple. It's just part of the regular web analytics that you get when you run your own server.
So do you not think you're going to post anymore? You're just going to?
No, I'm not. I mean, the account's still there.
Are you still on? Can you post right now, or are you still on a suspension?
No, I cleared my timeline. So to do that, I had to take down their offending post. But then I went in and I literally cleared my timeline. There's nothing on there. It's gone. The account's still there. I'm not going to close the account because I don't want somebody else to take that handle.
I'm looking at it right now. There's nothing there.
That's right. Nothing there. I killed it all. I went in and deleted every single thing.
Yeah, I mean, I use mine. It's been a telemark. I was a telemarketer. I was in high school, and it's a tool that I've used to connect with people and line up guests for my show. So I've that's where I get the value out of it.
It's there, you know, in that situation. I mean, if you've got something that gives you value, that's fine. But don't ever think that putting links to your show up there actually gets people to watch it. It doesn't. It does nothing.
Yeah, even if when you
Just
put something underneath it, if you put like a
doesn't
comment
make it
underneath the post.
doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
It's the algorithm deliberately buries anything that has an external link in it. And I understand why he does it. Okay, they all do it. All the social media, Facebook. I caught Facebook doing it, 10 years ago. It's one of the reasons I left Facebook.
Instagram, you can't even put a URL in the post.
Right. Well, but this is the reason they don't, because the entire point is to have the eyeballs on their site. Okay, and the problem with this is that if you run a forum like I do, where discussions take place, people take content and links and post them to other places. Well, I don't bury those, except for X now. Okay. But I mean, part of the bargain of the World Wide Web is you don't do that. That's the deal. We used to have this debate in the internet industry all the time with what's called peering. So you run an internet company, I run an internet company. I have some customers that pay for web server space on my system. They host their pages there. You have some customers that buy web server space on your system, and we both have people that buy access. Okay, at the time it was dial-up modems. Now it's cable modems, but the same thing, right? You're an end user. You want an internet connection. You may come to me. You may come to one of my competitors. You may come to AOL. Of course, AOL's pretty much gone now, but at the time that's how that was, right? Was that you had all these different companies that were doing this. When I was doing this, we had 100 competitors in Chicago, right? So it was not a small, I mean, if you didn't like me, there were 99 other choices. All right. On the other hand, if somebody didn't like them, there was me. So, but here's the thing. We all connected to each other. And if there was enough volume, I would pull a circuit into a neutral point where there was a large router complex and stick a router there. And you pull a circuit into there and you put a router there. And we talk to each other, and we don't I don't bill you and you don't bill me. Why? Because it's not, the differential is, it's not worth one of us trying to figure out how much value is passed between the two of us and who gets a better deal. Okay? It's just not. Now, if you do something abusive, then all of a sudden that changes. Okay, this was what the whole net neutrality thing was about when Netflix tried to pull this crap and got Obama to basically force the cable companies to provide that service to them, even though the cable company got absolutely nothing out of it, because Netflix was one-way content distribution from them to the customer. The cable company wasn't getting any of the money from the subscription that the customer paid Netflix. And rather than put servers in each of the cable company head ends, Netflix thought that the cable company ought to pay for the transport from that content all the way from San Francisco to Chicago. Well, that's nuts. But that's what they tried to do. And the cable company said, F you, you can buy transport circuits from us if you want to do this. Because there is no exchange of traffic going the other way that has any value to us. We used to have these fights every now and then when I was running MCS. And most of the time there was, once in a while somebody had to pay somebody, but most of the time there was a clean enough argument that there was value flow in both directions, and the spat went away. Now, where it became problematic was when somebody started trying to run a web scraper or do something that tampered with your data flow in a way that was damaging. And then there'd be a fight. But this is now evolved and has gotten easier for the large social media companies to do, because algorithmically they can, they can show this, what ought to be 1 out of 100, 100 out of 100 times to people that are supposedly following you. Oh, no, they'll only put it up 3% of the time. And so you will not notice, unless you're looking at the analytics, that this is going on. And yet on your end, you're referring back to X content, you're referring back to Facebook content, to Instagram content, to content on these other sites. People are clicking on those links, they're going back to that other page and looking at that stuff. You're not getting anything out of that. And they're not reciprocating in the other direction. Well, all right, fine. You can make that decision, Elon, as a business person. And my answer to that is this. So that's where it is.
For people listening to Karl, he put up the middle finger, by the way.
That's right. That's go fuck yourself.
No ass.
I mean, yeah, but that's, I mean, this is just part of the evolution of this is what happens when oligarchies get established. There is no regulatory pushback. You have people that supposedly try to go around this to some extent, in that, we now you have Mastodon and Blue Sky. There's a couple of other social media sites that have shown up because Elon is a bastard, and he likes Trump, and Trump's the devil, and therefore we're going to do this. Okay, fine. But it's just like the situation that we have with the healthcare environment in general in the United States, in that you may think there is some kind of competitive environment and some kind of open and free market, but there really is not. You have these entities that have managed to find ways to do things that do not get punished. Now, in the context of social media, there's probably not a law that's being violated. And the only reason that there isn't a fraud issue is because you're not paying anything. Okay, you can't defraud somebody unless there's money that's changing hands. So where's the money changing? Well, there's not. Okay, you're not being charged to be on the site. So there's no covenant of fair dealing involved, because there's no transaction. All right, so I highly doubt anybody could sue over this, for example. Well, you could, but you would not win.
And you wouldn't have the resources to go after them anyway, because.
Well, you might. I mean, you might, because there's an awful lot of people that are content creators that are getting fucked like this. Okay, they probably don't even realize it. And like I said, unless the content that you create is textual in nature, and it's on your own infrastructure where you can look at these logs and you can run these analyses, you have absolutely no idea this is going on. And it's, and again, if the effort that you put in and the time you spend on it is de minimis, doesn't really cost you anything, well, 6,000 clicks in a month is, if you didn't put in any effort, okay, who cares, right? But then Elon shuts down the API gateway, all of a sudden I have to do it manually. Well, now there is effort required. All right. At what point does that exceed the return? And the answer is pretty fast, when you're getting buried to the point that only 1/30 of what ought to be coming back at you is.
So are you assuming Substack is doing the same thing?
I would assume all of them are doing the same thing, but I don't, I don't have any, I don't have an account over at Substack, so I don't know, if that is in fact the case. But yeah, I would assume all of the different places that do this kind of thing. If they run a timeline kind of feed, then this is very easy for them to do, and it would be part of their, I know Facebook has been doing it, because it was one of the things that I noted a long time ago, was that, they had their own view of censorship, but at the same time, I could post one of my articles over there, and if they didn't knock it down immediately because they didn't like the content, I'd get very little play coming back into my system from that. Okay, now interestingly enough, there are a couple of sites that once in a while pick up one of my things, Citizen Free Press being one of them, and when they do, all of a sudden, bang, the site gets hammered. So there are places that don't do that kind of stuff. But then again, CFP is basically a link aggregator, kind of like what Drudge used to be.
Zero hedge too.
Uh, Zero hedge is an interesting case. I let's just say that that zero is appropriately named these days. They didn't used to be. I'm not sure what happened with them. I don't really know. I mean, the exactly what drives them is a little on the murky side. So, but they used to be worth reading, 10, 15 years ago. Today, I don't even go over there.
Interesting. I've been following them for 10 years. What did you see that has made you feel differently?
You can go down a rabbit hole only so many times before you better find a rabbit. There were a bunch of things that there was no single individual event, but it's drift away from what used to be a fairly decent place for breaking news that was, for the most part, reasonably well sourced. And I don't consider it to be that anymore. And I just simply don't have the time to do the filtration on that. It's not worth the effort, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I haven't been on Gateway Pundit as much as I used to be.
This has become a problem in the media generally. Okay, I mean, it even extends to places like CNN and Fox. In that, I don't know if you've noticed this, but you'll get some kind of event that will happen, and all of a sudden there'll be 15 different things that come from 15 different places, sometimes 15 different countries. I mean, this situation that came up with Zelensky, and they're identical. Well, how in the hell did that happen? Okay, these are supposedly independent people, sometimes separated by thousands of miles, and all of a sudden they've got exactly the same opinion and the same words. That's not independent thought and independent action. And one of the challenges that we have as a society, I believe, is that social media is not social at all. It is entirely designed around creating consensus and creating opinion, and it all works the same way. You have, on the one hand, the generation of the dopamine hits, right? Cute pictures of cats. They're pleasurable, right? Looking at a cat doing a cute thing. But then the other side of it is the exact opposite, which is the evil part, which is the adrenaline hits. And the algorithms are designed to keep you on the site. So the two centers that they target in your psychology are pleasure and rage. And if you want to know why dating has been ruined, you can find it right there. If you want to know why civil discourse between people, even within local communities, has been destroyed, you can find it right there. And as far as so-called news, forget about it, because it's all manufactured. And you saw it on display with this situation with Zelensky, and all of a sudden these people, all of these different European, political figures, they all say exactly the same thing within seconds of each other. I mean, literally exactly the same thing, same sentence. They didn't independently all come up with that. That was all manufactured. That was somebody's connected thing within there. It's not them. It's not their expression of opinion. It's something that's been wound together and then presented to people as as what all these people think. Well, it's not what these people think. It's what someone thinks, but it's not what all these people independently came up with on their own. That much I'm certain of.
Well, and also, I mean, you have the contrast after Friday. We had European media outlets saying, well, what was it? It was a French newspaper where it had a picture of Trump and it said Putin lover or something along the lines of that. So you've got that end, and then you have everybody in the United States. Well, not everybody on the right, alt-right media in the United States. Cheering on. What happened on Friday?
I want to know. I want a transcript of the conversation that Zelensky had with the Democratic Caucus and Lindsey Graham, who was in the room just before he went into that meeting. I want to know what they told him. Of course, we'll never find that out. That was not a public event. But that he did have that meeting is a known fact, and who was in it is also a known fact. Where did he get the idea? Now, maybe the guy just, loose cannon. He wasn't given any kind of an idea that this was something that he could do and get away with. Maybe. Or maybe he was goaded into it. Stand proud, Zelensky. Trump will fold. Oops. Okay. Bad guess, jackass. So, and then, of course, the next question is, was that an honest assessment of what these people thought, or did they bait it? I don't have any idea. But I think it's a question we ought to ask, don't you? I mean, this is, that we essentially, and then, as if that's not enough, the stuff that's come out in the last day or so, okay? Just today, in fact, I believe this morning, there was a thing on the wire that I saw that he's told the Europeans that he expects this war to go on for a long time. There'll be no peace soon. Okay. So you don't want peace. What you want is more war fighting material. By the way, you're out of men. What does that mean? It means you want somebody else's boots on the ground to get killed. If there was a way to have a constructive conversation with the Trump administration on trying to mediate a settlement, I don't know. It looked bad after that blow up in the Oval Office. I think somebody just dumped about 10 gallons of gasoline on that fire this morning. I don't know how you're going to put that one out. You got to be out of your mind. You're running around saying, "Well, I'm prepared for, and I expect a long war." What, 3 years is not enough? How many more years would you like?
It's 4 now, right? It's 4 years.
Yeah,
Karl, I gotta show you how stupid people are. I'm not gonna show this person's name, but just on my personal page. People are just so they're just so dumb. Like this guy puts in, he's obsessed with Trump, obsessed with him in a negative way, and he writes on there. One person writes, very concerned about our future, and I said, if you weren't concerned before, why should you be concerned now? And then this guy comes on and he goes, how does it feel to be anti-American and pro-Putin? I said, I'm not the one that wants more war. How does it feel to be in favor of more young men dying? You don't need to overcomplicate. This is very simple right now. So the guy responds back, how does anything I've said make me pro-war? I want Ukraine to be sovereign and not have Putin meddle with their borders. I said, so you want the war to continue, which will result in more people dying? That's what you're saying. And then I responded back again. I said, you ever been in a war? Have you ever spoke to someone on the front lines of a war? And this person responds back and says, I want the Ukrainian citizens to live in peace and not be bullied by Russia. I don't need to have been in a war to understand war. I have several friends who have fought in war, yet despise this president, Musk and Putin. Do you lack so much empathy for a country being bullied by Putin? You expect Ukraine to just let Putin take part of his country? Imagine if Mexico came in and started taking part of Arizona. How would you react to that? This is now I'm the idiot because I engage in this stuff. So
but here's okay. So here's this is going back and forth on my side as well. Right? I just had a guy. By the way, his IP actually does trace to Europe. So when he first showed up and started running this stuff, I was wondering if he was a troll here in the U.S. somewhere. Right. So, nice thing about running your own software is that you can actually see what's going on and whether or not it's somebody's VPN, or a Tor exit point or something like this, right? You can actually get a pretty good idea whether or not it really is. It appears to be coming out of somebody's house. All right. So, I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a relay. I don't know. But it certainly looks authentic, right? At a base level of traffic analysis, it looks authentic. And the browser has tags in the language packs and stuff that lead me to believe it is. All right, that this really is originating from where it appears to be originating from. But he starts with this, and I said, look, you need. This is not in an isolated incident. It's not the first time that something like this has happened. Okay, Turkey is a NATO member because during the Cold War, Russia's deep water naval port at Sevastopol, which is in Crimea, in order for their ships to get into open ocean, they have to go through the Straits of Bosphorus, which is controlled by Turkey. Right? Turkey's both the north and the south side of the strait. Okay, so that waterway, which connects to the Med, is Turkey's. They own it essentially because it passes through there. That's why they're in NATO. Turkey is not a North Atlantic nation, obviously. Everybody's got a map, right? The reason they were admitted into NATO was to give NATO a way to choke off Russia's access to open water if there was a war. That's why. And then, if you recall, we had this little thing, this little dust up with the USSR and the Soviets with Cuba. The reason Russia, the USSR, the Soviets, put missiles in Cuba was because we put missiles in Turkey, which is about a 5-minute flight time to Moscow. Okay? That's why they did it. We were on the edge of a nuclear war with the Soviets over that. And in fact, but for one Soviet naval officer in a submarine who was given an order to fire a nuclear torpedo at an American warship, and just like our nuclear protocols are that multiple officers have to turn the launch key at the same time to confirm the order, he refused. He didn't turn his key. Had he done so, that torpedo would have been fired, it would have detonated, it would have blown up an American warship, a nuclear explosion, and we almost certainly would have had a nuclear war right there. One Soviet, by the way, he was court-martialed for refusing to do it. He's now considered a hero because he saved the world from a nuclear conflict. But at the time, he was court-martialed because he did not follow orders. He was ordered to launch, and he did not do so. So we've been down this road, okay? And as I have pointed out to people, Crimea was purchased by Russia. Catherine the Great bought it long before America existed. That port, that naval port, is almost exactly identical, and what Ukraine was doing was almost exactly identical to how, I mean, how would you think about it if the Chinese and the Mexicans got together and put a naval base just south of San Diego? I mean, we have a naval base at San Diego, right? So, they stick a bunch of missiles right on the other side of the border. That's 30 seconds and kaboom. Do you think we would go to war over that? Of course we would. And then they tell us we have to, that's Mexican territory. You have to give that up. No. Okay. Oh, we really mean it. Okay, we're going to have a war. The parallels, I mean, is it an exact analog? No. But this kind of thing is not new. And the reality is that regardless of how you feel about it, Zelensky has no way to win. Ukraine does not have any way to win this conflict in terms of forcing Russia back to, to what they think, whatever they want, and then for them to turn around and accede into NATO. They have no way to force that to happen. They can't. They don't have the men. They don't have the material. There's no possibility of doing it. So you can either sue for peace on the best terms you can get, which, frankly, I don't think they're any different than what Putin wanted in the first place, except now you've got a DMZ, a formal DMZ in the eastern provinces, basically everything past the Dnieper, instead of essentially get your crap out of there and quit screwing around. Now you're going to have a formal DMZ there. But that is essentially what Putin said had to stop. Was it no more, none of this BS about Ukraine going into NATO, no more harassment in the eastern provinces. You stop shelling people who are ethnically Russian. And by the way, our port is staying there. That's Sevastopol. It's not going away. We're not giving it up. We bought it. We bought it long before you guys were around. It's ours, period, end of conversation. And that was his position originally, and as far as I can tell, it still is. Now, if Z wants to continue to press his case, well, he can do that, but Putin has absolutely no design on taking over half of Europe and trying to reconstitute the USSR. That's stupid. First off, he doesn't have the men, he doesn't have the material, he doesn't have the GDP to do it. And on top of that, during the time of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was essentially an autonomous zone. And the reason is the Kremlin knew damn well that they were ungovernable. They were the same, basically, there's always been roughly 4 factions within Ukraine. They're all willing to kill each other at the drop of a hat. They don't care. They're an ungovernable piece of land. They always have been. And so the USSR essentially left them as an autonomous, even though technically under the USSR, they essentially left them as an autonomous zone within the Soviet Union. These people don't understand this. Hell, during World War II, when the Nazis tried to march on Moscow and essentially crush Russia, a huge number of young men in Western Ukraine, when the Nazi army came through there, picked up rifles and joined the Nazis. Okay? Now, that didn't work out very well for them because they got into Russia, the Red Army stopped them, turned them around, and then when they came back through Ukraine, they not only killed all the Ukrainians that had joined up, they killed all their family members. They went through and they slaughtered everybody that was associated with those people. So if you wonder why all these people hate each other, well, they've been hating each other for 1,000 years. Well, this is an awful lot like the whole situation with the Israelis and the Palestinians. They've hated each other forever. They're not going to stop trying to kill one another. The best thing America can do is stay the hell out of it.
So what do you think occurs now? Because Zelensky has an emergency meeting over the weekend with European leaders. You had Starmer say, we won't abandon you, and we'll send whatever resources that we have. I read a snippet of Martin Armstrong saying this is what the Europeans want. They want to go to war with Russia.
Well, okay, let them go to war with Russia. We've got an ocean between us and them. If they want to take the risk of London being turned into a ball of radioactive gas, I think it's stupid. Look, America, after World War II, we had the only functional industrial base left because everybody on both sides had blown each other's stuff up. Germany's was laid waste, so was France's, so was Italy, even the English, okay? Germans never actually managed to land there, but they did throw an awful lot of buzz bombs and V2s on it. They weren't all that effective, but they did hit a decent amount of industry and screw it up. So, and the European continent, most of their heavy industry was destroyed. So you take a look at that situation, you say, well, okay, what came out of that? Well, in the 1950s, we had a pretty good decade here in the United States industrially and from a GDP point of view. And it wasn't because we were smarter than everybody else. It was because our factories were still there and theirs weren't.
Yeah, we were the last ones standing.
Well, we were the last ones standing because we didn't have the war on our soil. If these guys are, first off, if they actually put a single soldier on the ground over there, they lose their Article 5 protection under NATO. If you take part in a belligerent act, you do not have the ability to drag the rest of the treaty members in on your defense. So if the UK wants to do this, first off, I don't think they have either the men or the material to do it. I mean, they've already sent Zelensky an awful lot of stuff. Okay, I don't know what they've got in the way of actual stores. Their defense spending is nowhere near large enough to actually finance and operate a war, and I don't know how quickly they could convert to wartime production and do that. Would it be fast enough to matter? I have no idea. But if they actually want to put troops on the ground and enter the conflict, that's on them. But it does not obligate the United States. Not in treaty, not in any other way. And we would be out of our mind to get sucked into that.
So where do you see this going in the short term?
I don't know. I used to think that Zelensky at least had enough going on up here that, at the point that he realizes he's out of dudes and he's rapidly running out of everything else, that you sue for peace because the alternative is unconditional surrender, and then Russia takes whatever the hell they want. All right. I'm not convinced the guy's sane at this point. And that's a problem. But, I didn't think Europe was quite this crazy. Here's an interesting side point. Estonia disconnected from the Russian electrical grid just a few days ago. Right? There was a lot of fanfare over this. That, those evil bastards and Putin and this and that and everything. Russia generates about 20% of their electrical power from nuclear, about 20% from hydro. Anybody that has a brain where they've got hydro, they use it because it's the closest thing to a free lunch you can ever find. Almost all of the rest is petroleum, it's hydrocarbon fuels, natural gas and oil. No green shit. Less than 5% is renewables within Russia. The average Russian pays less than 10 cents in US money, even after all the sanctions and all the currency fuckery that we've done over the last several years, less than 10 cents a kilowatt hour for power. Estonia disconnected from the Russian grid. Russia was willing to sell Estonia all the electricity they wanted. Estonia said, oh, but you're bastards. Okay. They shut it off. Their power cost instantly went up by 50%. Now, there is a basic problem with this from an economics point of view. If you get into a conflict with these guys, behind every unit of GDP is a unit of energy. If Russia can produce electricity for consumer retail sale at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and they can and are, and you're paying 30 or 40 because you're full of windmills and solar panels, you've got a problem. Because that very same power is the power you need to use to make tanks and planes and bombs and missiles and all that other nice stuff. And you're paying 3 times as much as your adversary is for one of the key raw materials that goes into everything you want to make that goes boom. This is not to your advantage. All right? So, I mean, this is, and, we should learn something from this too, because I started digging into the energy makeup, where Russia actually got their power from when Estonia made this announcement, and as soon as I saw that, I said their power prices are going to skyrocket. And sure enough, about a week ago, there was a story out that said, in fact, they did. It went up by 50%, literally the same day they turned it off. So, I mean, you know, by the way, do you think the people of Estonia actually took a vote on that? I said, we vote to increase our power bills by 50%. Would you vote to increase your power bill by 50%, Michael? Probably
No,
not, right?
no.
Well, I know I wouldn't. Okay. I didn't think you would. I thought you were a little more sane than that. Um, but they apparently, I have to believe they didn't. Okay.
So Zelensky appears to be out of his mind. Europe is not thinking rational as of right now.
No.
Where do you see this going, or do you see it diffusing? And what will the United States role be in it, as it sits today?
I think Trump, although I wouldn't exactly call him a statesman, I think he's got the general correct idea, which is that whether you like it or not, I mean, you have to, if you're going to negotiate something, you have to operate from where you are. Doesn't matter where you'd like to be. You have to, you negotiate from the position you have. And the position that Ukraine has is that they are now essentially trying to bargain for their continued existence as an independent nation. And I believe they can still achieve that. They can still keep that. They're going to have to give up any possibility of NATO accession, and they're going to have to give up any sort of weaponry or military presence east of the Dnieper. Okay, I see no other way to settle this other than that becoming a formal DMZ. And if Europe is willing to put the people on the ground to secure that, I don't think we should do it. First off, we're not close enough to it. It's not our fight. Europe has a bunch of people that are absolutely convinced that Putin wants to bring tanks all the way through Ukraine and back into Poland, and basically get the band back together all the way to Germany, maybe. Those people are out of their minds. But if that's truly what they believe, then they should be willing to put the people on the ground to make that not the case. One of the things that I do think that Trump's position, I mean, I think the whole thing with the rare earths is probably a red herring. I don't think there's enough there to be worth that sort of investment. I just don't think the recoverable material is large enough. However, if you have American industrialists and American employees on the ground, whether we're drilling holes in the ground to get natural gas or oil, or it doesn't really matter what we're extracting over there, what the minerals are that we're extracting. It makes no difference. You got our guys over there. If you think that Putin is going to start shooting at them, you got a couple of cans missing out of your six-pack. Okay, that's a pretty strong deterrent. I don't see him doing anything that would deliberately hit people that are people on the ground in that country. I don't see that happening.
What about the gold that's been leaving Europe and coming back to the United States? Do you think that ties in at all, or they're somehow connected with the anticipation of this thing escalating?
Well, the problem with any kind of a real war, not a little proxy dust up like we've got going on right now, but a real one, is that the loser is going to be very tempted to push the big red button, whoever gets behind the eight ball. And we and the Soviets are not the only ones that have them. There's an awful lot of them around. There's some declared, most, we know who has most of them, but I bet there's a bunch that are not publicly listed somewhere. And I can see, the probability of a conflict that actually gets going in the European continent getting out of hand, I think, is pretty high. but America certainly has no business being involved in that.
What would that look like to you, Karl? If it, if the European continent, if that kinetic war occurred, how do you envision that? Like, where would it take place? Poland?
Well, yeah, probably. I mean, you've also got all the Baltics and you remember you've got Belarus and stuff that are technically not part of Russia, but kind of sort of are. They're kind of sort of Russian friendly. Okay, there's you've got a lot of ethnic weird stuff in Europe, especially in the eastern part. And so, I mean, everybody kind of, and then the other issue you have throughout Europe is the amount of migration that they've allowed in, specifically from Africa, is off the rack. Now, what happens within European society if all of a sudden those countries go on a war footing? I don't know. But there is every possibility that ends very badly internally within those nations. It has nothing to do with Putin. Just the fact that all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of people that you can't take care of anymore. And oh, by the way, they're not exactly friendly to your current Anglo-Saxon way of life.
And this is something to me, as it appears that this could happen, this could be imminent. I would think that every day that passes, it'll be less likely to occur, maybe?
Well, maybe. I mean, part of the problem with saber rattling is figuring out when somebody's really serious. What Zelensky wants to do and what he physically can do are two different things. And I find it curious that the Europeans are so receptive to this, but on the other hand, I don't have a particularly good perspective on that because neither myself or any of my immediate family was ever, behind the Iron Curtain during the Soviet years, in USSR. A lot of people over there were. I mean, Putin's comes up from KGB, but on the other hand, the other side of that too is that he had members of his extended family that were killed by the Nazis during World War II. So, boy, he's not very friendly to that idea. Right? I mean, if your grandfather got a bullet in the back from somebody on the other side, I don't know, are those wounds gone? I don't know what they are on either side. I mean, this is also part of what I think is driving the whole Ukraine thing with the Russian hatred as well, is that there are an awful lot of people over there whose family members joined with the Nazis during World War II, and then they got slaughtered by the Red Army. Now, are they ever going to give up on that hatred for Russia? I'm not so sure.
Here's the other question that pops into my head in regards to this. Could it be that the world economically is broke, particularly Europe, and that the only way out of this is by war?
Well, there's a clean argument that's why World War II happened. A very clean argument that the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, of course, imposed punitive, retributive payments from Germany and the other Axis powers to the rest of the European continent. That's ultimately, it's a large part of what led to Weimar and hyperinflation within Germany, and very likely was a major factor in Hitler's rise to power. And well, I can fix this, but there will be some sacrifices. Yeah, well, that didn't work out so good. But that's the problem with serious economic dislocations is that, yes, historically speaking, resource shortages And economic dislocations are pretty far up the list in terms of leading to big conflicts. So yeah, it could very easily be part of the problem here.
Do you wonder if, I feel like we've touched on this before, but, are we at the end of the economic cycle globally? And so in regards to this, also, you see all this gold, like I mentioned earlier, leaving London and being repatriated back to the United States. And I don't know if you had a chance to listen to my conversation with Matt Smith at all, but in regards to the Mar-a-Lago Accord, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, familiar with all this?
Yeah, you got to be a little careful with some of that. I mean, there's a lot of alleged accords that supposedly happened, but unless you've got something that's on a piece of paper somewhere that's a formal treaty, uh, be careful with the rabbit hole. There may not be a rabbit in there.
Well, it's an interesting theory, and he had said this. He goes, I'm not saying this is going to happen. He's like, but
Right.
it's something to think about. And
Well, so there's a basic problem with the idea of a so-called reset of the global economic structure, okay? And that is that in accounting, for every credit, there's a debit. And so if you do something like this, you screw people on the other side of the ledger. Now, who gets screwed? Well, and by the way, if you screw them, what do they do about it? Because you're not talking about, I mean, I got slightly screwed. I had a small position in an ETF, an American ETF traded on American stock exchanges that had Russian companies in it. It's part of standard international diversification, okay? It was not seeking specific firms. It's just, it's wise to have a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, but in U.S. registered securities, because as soon as you start buying things that are actually overseas and getting involved in foreign transactions, you have currency risk and you also have corruption risk, which, unless you happen to know an awful lot about that area, you're really asking for trouble, okay? So, I mean, yeah, you can make a lot of money doing that, but you can also end up with a big fat zero. Well, when the Ukraine-Russian thing kicked off, the U.S. government confiscated all of that from U.S. people, including me. That ETF was zeroed. 100% loss. Gone. Now, it wasn't a lot of money. But they didn't take that from Russia. They didn't take that from some oligarch. They took it from me. And the firms in question were not war fighters. They weren't Russian oligarchs. They were ordinary Russian businesses that were in an ETF that was on a registered American stock exchange. You start playing around with stuff like this, I just don't see it. All right? I mean, are there people that would like to entertain that kind of a fantasy? Sure. But like I said, there's people on the other side of every transaction. There's always two sides on every transaction. Somebody's going to get it in the starfish, and they're not going to be happy about it. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to screw China? How much of our treasury debt does China hold? What do you do if you zero that? Well, what if they turn, 80% of our antibiotics come from precursor chemicals that are made over there, and while we could make them here, it would probably take us 3 or 4 years to stand that capacity up. How would you like to not be able to get a standard course of antibiotics for the next 3 years if you get a lung infection? Because they could turn around and cut that off.
do you see
By the way, if you think that's bad, they got caught with telemetry and remote update code in instrumentation that's used in most of our hospitals. So they could turn around and brick every one of those devices in an unrecoverable way instantaneously. Those are the monitors that go, if you're in a hospital bed, that thing that's on the side of your bed that's got the blood pressure and all the, all your other biometrics that is going to the nurse's station, those. If they bricked all of those, how many people would it kill because the hospital has no way to manually monitor all those people that are in those beds? They could do that.
So you see the dollar remaining the reserve currency for the foreseeable future?
The dollar essentially had that destroyed by the Russian sanctions. That status, for all intents and purposes, is gone. As a international chosen medium of exchange, it's gone. That was ruined by doing that, and it will never come back. It's the reason we have the inflation that spiked immediately after the Russian invasion, and it wasn't the invasion that did it, it was the sanctions regime. You now have international trade taking place in the currency pairs of the two partners. It used to take place largely in the dollar because the dollar was not at risk of having some kind of an instability event happen during the time that production and shipment was occurring. That is now gone. It was destroyed by the Biden administration deliberately along with the rest of the European Union. And that is never going to come back. They're never going to trust us on that again. And I mean, that's not reserves, but that is a inflationary privilege that the United States has had for 50 years, where as international trade volume increases, so if you go from $1 trillion of trade to $2 trillion, that's $1 trillion worth of debt that we can issue without having any inflationary impact in the United States. Why? Because that extra trillion is in flight. It is in process. And during that period of time, if we issue credit into that, it does not show up as additional money supply in the U.S. We deliberately, I don't know if Yellen and the other people involved in this were smart enough to realize this was going to happen. But as soon as it started, I warned that this was going to mean that all the deficit spending that we were doing was going to immediately show up in inflation, and it did. Because we destroyed that. And that was a privilege the United States had held for the last 50 years. We threw it in the trash can.
What about if things go kinetic with Europe? Would that potentially make the dollar stronger because the money's going to have to go from somewhere?
Well, things go kinetic with Europe. You could have the euro. The Europeans are going to have a very serious problem. How do they finance that? Okay, if they start emitting euros, that's going to trash that exchange rate. I mean, if you look at what happened during the U.S. Civil War when Lincoln issued greenbacks, the inflationary impact was pretty severe. You could have the same kind of thing happen over there in Europe. That would it would certainly help us. It would not help them. They wouldn't like it one little bit. So.
What a fascinating time we're in right now. So the tariffs go into effect tonight with Canada and Mexico, unless something's changed in the hour, over a little over an hour that you and I've spoken. But
as far as I know, it's still on.
This is amazing, right? This is the world we're in, Karl. Like literally, I'm not being rude looking down, but I'm looking to see if anything's changed, because if it's changed, I want to bring it up right now while I'm talking to you.
Well, yeah, you got to refresh, right? I mean, that's the way it is. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Well, so tariffs, what Trump is doing in this regard is a legitimate strategy. Many people say he's just using it as a bargaining chip to get what he wants. Well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. Okay, what he wants is for the flow of migration to stop, which it largely has. All right, so he got what he wanted on that regard, but he also wants the drugs stopped. And that's a problem because Mexico, and to a lesser extent Canada, and China have made quite a little business out of bringing fentanyl precursors out of China into both Canada and Mexico, manufacturing the stuff and then bringing it into the United States. And it's killing a very significant number of Americans and has been for quite a while. So your options as a leader and having the limits of sovereignty of your nation are they're stark, right? I mean, what are you going to do? You can raid people. Now, one of the other things Trump has done is he's designated those cartels in Mexico as terrorist organizations.
Which is another topic I want to. Carl, you got all evening? We're going to talk like this? I mean, this is a 4-hour conversation.
No, I'm all good. But he did that, okay. But what I haven't seen, and is rather interesting, is that Canada, rather than stomp on this manufacturing stuff and their foreign participation in this, they haven't put up the middle finger, but they really haven't said or done anything I could determine. Okay, at least nothing that I've seen on the wire services. So Trump said, look, you got a month, and then I'm doubling the tariffs. Put a stop to it or else. Well, it appears we're going to get the or else. The immediate reaction out of both the Chinese and the Canadians was, we'll target industries that we think will hurt the United States. So Canada went after liquor production, for example, American booze. China is threatening to go after agricultural products. If you get into this kind of a match where somebody's doing this, not because they see trade imbalances, which are a serious issue and a separate issue, but because you're literally shipping poison into their country, and your answer is you're going to try to punish the guy on the other side, you might have gotten away with that with Biden. I don't think you're going to get away with that with the Trump administration. And my guess is that all that does is infuriates him further, and he's just going to say, okay, fine, you're not good with 20%, let's make it 30. See how far we have to go before you scream. The biggest issue that Canada has is that the imbalance wildly runs the wrong way for them, in that they are at a severe disadvantage. When it comes to China, it's the same situation. Yes, certainly we have things we export over there, particularly in the agricultural sector. But for the most part, the damage is on their side from this if they try to get reciprocal with it. So, yet Buffett without this and said, well, the consumer pays these. No, Warren. That is mercantilist bullshit. The point of doing something like this and the purpose is called autarky. It is to force the production back into the United States. Right now we have steel in the U.S. in many cases that gets stamped into a part, goes across the Ambassador Bridge on a truck into Windsor. In Windsor, it gets combined with other parts and formed into a subassembly. It's then shipped back across the Ambassador Bridge and put into a car in a manufacturing plant in the United States. Why can't you bring that intermediate facility back into Detroit from Canada? You can. And if you do, what happens to Canada? Well, all those jobs disappear over there, right? And we gain them over here. Now, why didn't you do that in the first place? Why did you have that production over there? And the answer is because of business conditions, it was cheaper. That's the reason it was there. That's a problem we have to address. But if it's due to subsidization, which should not be the case. I mean, Canada and America, we're both Western nations with a reasonably comparable standard of living, right? I mean, we don't have 10-year-olds digging up cobalt deposits like they do in the DRC, right, for lithium batteries. So that kind of situation, we don't have a slave labor situation. Now we do with China, but not with Canada. But if you force that production back into the United States with these tariffs, Canada's the one who loses. We don't lose on that. We win on that.
See, don't you think though, and that's where I come back to the whole idea of, my conversation with Matt in regards to like sovereign wealth fund and using these tariffs in order to, bring
reindustrialize the United States, even though
Right.
you're not going to do that in a week. It's going to take
No.
time, but it'll
No.
incentivize these companies, to start bringing this stuff back here, and we don't need to, not necessarily need to be the reserve currency any longer. The world could exist on a multiple, you have multiple currencies where you wouldn't even be able to do any type of, what was Marco Rubio talking about? 5 years from now, you won't be able to have a currency war, right? Something along, I'm not saying it right. Something along the lines of that. And is that why they're devaluing the dollar right now?
Well, they are. I'm not sure who's talking. They're devaluing the dollar. The DX is at 106 right now. I'm not exactly sure where anybody thinks that that's so horrible. Okay.
Well, they would need to. I'm sorry, they would need to devalue the dollar in order to.
Okay, but I mean, historically speaking, right? If you go back and you look at like in 2020, it was right around 100 at the beginning of the year, and then of course we had the COVID thing, right? And it ended up it bottomed in 21 around 90, but right now it's trading 106. I mean, it's been trading in this range of about 112 to 100 for the last 3 years or so. It's right up the middle. It's right in the center. I hear this kind of stuff all the time, but remember, in a fiat currency world, everything's relative. Okay. The big problem that you have within the United States is it's not how many dollars you have, it's what they buy. And the idea that we can grow out of the inflationary mess that we created during the COVID years is flat out stupid. That has never worked in the history of the world, and it certainly hasn't worked in the history of the United States. When we had the inflationary impulse that came through in the 1970s, which had its start in the late 60s, but in the 70s is when it really bit people, everybody likes to think that Ronald Reagan and the growth that we had was how we got out of that mess. That is such bullshit. The way we got out of that mess was we forced all the women who were at home taking care of kids to go get a job. That's how we got out of that on a household income basis. The math on this is pretty simple. You take a look at the BLS report, comes out every month. I'm going to do a segment on stocks and jocks next Friday on it because it's due. It's on Friday, right? Every first Friday of every month, we get the jobs report. About half the population is working. They're in the labor force. They're employed. They actually, that's those people. The other two are divided into roughly equal proportions. Half of the rest, or a quarter of the whole, are living on assets. If you're on Social Security, if you're living on your stock portfolio, whatever have you, you're living on assets. Okay? And the last piece are parasites. Nobody likes that word, but it's the truth. And by the way, for a huge percentage of them, that's not a bad thing. It's just a fact of life. They're children. Okay? They can't go get a job. They're kids. So the problem here is that in order for the working people to have their wages grow enough to get out of the inflationary hole, because they're the ones that support the other two, they'd have to grow at twice the rate of that inflationary hole because they're only half of the hole. You can't do that. If you try to do that, all you're going to do is drive inflation higher. Well, that's self-defeating. Okay, so instead of $50,000, I make $100,000. But instead of $3 a gallon for gas, I pay $6. What the hell good did that do me? I have more money, but everything costs twice as much. You can't solve the problem that way. The only reason it worked coming out of the 1970s was that we had a reservoir of about half the women who were staying at home taking care of kids, and we forced them out of the house into the world of work, where they could earn an income. That was where that piece came from that we were able to do that with. That's why was able to be done. Well, we don't have another, there is nobody sitting in a house that's playing with themselves in sufficient size that we could force out into the world of work and make that happen. Can't be done this way. So the only way you can fix this is to collapse prices. And the basics of supply and demand tell you that, well, if you have less demand, price goes down. So if we start arresting all the people that employ or rent to illegal immigrants, by the way, that's 10 million in the last 4 years that have come into the United States, probably another 20 that are already here, so that's 10% of the population. You force them all out of the United States, what happens to the price of apartments? They collapse. What happens to the price of car insurance? It collapses. Why? Because all the uninsured motorists, well, not all of them, but a decent percentage of them, they're gone. And by the way, that means that when someone hits you, they probably have insurance this time. So the insurance price goes way down. What happens to when the price of apartments and the price of houses goes down? What happens to the cost of homeowners insurance? It declines. Why? Because the replacement cost drops. What happens to the cost of food? Well, if there's less people buying steak, price of steak goes down. At the same time, what happens to the value of labor and the average wage paid to people? Well, you throw all the H-1Bs out of the country, you throw all the illegal immigrants out of the country, and the supply and demand works that way too. There's less supply, wages go up. So now the basic laws of economics tell us that if you do this, the average American consumer gets 2 benefits instead of 1. His cost of living goes down and his wages increase. This is good for everybody except all those people who have been skimming off all the extra money and putting it in their pockets at the top 0.1%. The stock market doesn't like it one little bit. The real estate market doesn't like it one little bit. All the people that own those assets are going to take it in the starfish. But that's the minority. Okay? The average American benefits tremendously from that kind of a rebalancing. And oh, by the way, Trump has about another month to get on this, because when we go down that road, you're going to get a nasty recession. When you do that, and it starts, government's tax receipts are going to go down, which means if they don't cut this crap out, the deficit explodes higher, they finance it, the inflation comes roaring back, and they undo all the progress. It's immediately nullified, so they can't do that. So you're going to get a very deep recession. It's going to be extremely sharp and very rapid as the realignment occurs. And at the same time, you have to take a meat axe to the medical system and throw people in prison for things that have been felonies for 100 years. You could take 80% of the cost of care out, and you would not harm a single person in terms of actually being able to get medical care. You'd probably actually improve Americans' health by doing that. But you would make unemployed an awful lot of people that are currently, they're not doctors or nurses, they're billing clerks, and they would all lose their jobs. The problem with that is, of course, now they stop paying taxes, and now tax receipts go down. But if you took 15% of the cost, which is about what it would be, of employing someone in America, those jobs from overseas would come back here in the U.S. They'd come back immediately and they'd stay. So we would get a tremendous recovery, but it would not be instantaneous. If Trump does not do this now, and he tries to push this off, and there is some noise coming out of Johnson's office that I saw something on this afternoon. I didn't get time to dig into it. But there's noise being made that they're not even going to look at doing anything about the budgetary issues until October. Basically, they're going to wait till the end of the fiscal year. If they do that, you're going to see the unemployment and the inflation rates are going to go up. They're going to start rising precipitously. We just today, in fact, I'm looking at the TNX, the 10-year Treasury, and the 13-week bill. It inverted again. It just went negative today. Now it has been on a upward path out of serious negative territory since the beginning of September. It peaked right around the new year and has been sliding a little bit on and off, but it is now inverted again. That is an extremely bad sign because the odds that this is a compounding recessionary impulse that's being telegraphed by this indicator is very high. And if he tries to put this off, you're going to get that high unemployment and that high inflation right into the maw of the elections, and he loses both houses. Everyone votes their wallet.
And how bad could this high inflation get to where, I mean, could you see a scenario where it could be a hyperinflation?
No, but I very easily could see double digit. I could see 10%. I mean, that's the problem with that is that if you get that kind of a thing over any length of time and it's not immediately corrected, you have the potential for the loss of what we consider to be civil society, because the bottom 25% of the country cannot afford that. And you can't print money to try to make it up for them in more handouts, because all that does is make it worse. So hungry people tend to riot, is the problem.
Does it make you you know, when Elon's talking about these Doge dividend checks?
He's out of his mind.
I mean, it sounds to me like a universal basic income, and do you wonder if it's tied into this, that they expect this inflation to get to, you know, to hit these levels, and so they're going to start cutting checks to people?
I would hope Basant is not that stupid. Basant seems like a pretty smart guy. It seems that we have a Treasury Secretary that actually has a brain in their head this time, unlike Yellen. But if they were to do something like that, they actually did that. I mean, if you want to know where all the crazy inflation came from, it came from those COVID checks. Paying people to literally sit at home, smoke bongs, and throw beer bottles out the window. That's not a joke. I have a niece who had to get up, go to work, because she worked in a retail store where she stocked shelves. She had up at 5:30 in the morning to get there to stock those shelves at 6 o'clock. Her shift started at 6. The guy in the house next to her was still up drinking and smoking weed at 5:30 in the morning, chucking beer bottles out the window. Okay? Because he was getting paid COVID cash. She was considered an essential worker because otherwise, you know, I mean, if you don't stock the shelves, there's nothing to buy, right? So she had to go to work. You have any idea how pissed off she was about this? I mean, you know, yeah. She had to go do a job. He's sitting around playing with himself.
How do you feel about where AI is right now and the evolution of where it's going?
Well, AI is just a pattern, a very good pattern sieve. That's all it is. It's artificial, but it's not intelligent. And that bubble is in the process of bursting. I don't know if you heard the stuff that came out of Microsoft recently. They're not nearly so bullish. You know, if you build it, they will come. Yeah, maybe not. I mean, part of the problem is that the Chinese really threw a monkey wrench into things, and they showed. Now, I don't know if we had a bunch of collusive behavior going on between players in the space in the United States. I suspect we probably did. I thought it was. I think I mentioned on one of the earlier appearances I did with you that I was asked to be part of a panel on AI, an academic panel at a conference a few years ago. And I pointed out a couple of things, one of them being that I didn't see how you could possibly train these data sets without violating copyright on an industrial scale. By the way, that's seriously illegal. It's a felony, especially when done for commercial gain, which of course it is, right? And I didn't see how these guys were going to get away with this without people coming after them criminally, not on a civil level, but criminally. But the other problem I had with it was that this is an extraordinarily resource-intensive thing. in terms of the amount of electricity it uses and things like this, and the money it costs for the equipment. And nobody was making money at it. So at some point, you have to start making money in real terms, or all you're doing is burning $100 bills on the front yard. And I have not seen that. And then this DeepSeek thing shows up, and a lot of people are screaming about the fact that, well, you know, if you load that app, all your data belong to China. Well, yes, true statement. But unfortunately for the people that want to scream about it the loudest, what DeepSeek also did was release the source code and the training sets. So anybody can download it, run it on their own machine. And I went through this in a little bit of detail. I didn't spend a huge amount of time on it. I don't have a big enough machine to run it here, even the limited model. But I could equip one at a reasonable amount of cost. Okay, I mean, these are things that, unless you had millions of dollars, you couldn't, you know, in the way this was being looked at before, it was out of your reach. I didn't have any reason to make that kind of an investment in it. But now we're talking about something that I could do for probably $4 or $5 grand. Well, that's a different story. 5,000 is not, you know, a little different than $1 million, right? So, but I don't have any particular reason to go chase this. But the way they went at this was rather interesting. And it leads me to wonder whether or not there was an awful lot of groupthink and academic bullshit that was rolled into all of this, along with being funded and stoked by NVIDIA and some of these other companies that were in the forefront of making all the money, collecting, you know, basically collecting on people buying their stuff. Because in hindsight, what DeepSeek did doesn't look all that innovative. Yes, it's a simplification. It's whacking a couple of zeros off the money. But it's something that if I had spent 6 months working in this area, I would have tried it. It's not that innovative. It's not the kind of thing that I go, oh God, how the hell did you ever figure that one out? You know, it's not that sort of a thing, all right? And there are things that have happened in technology that, you know, that make your eyebrows go up. This isn't in that category at all. So my suspicion is that this bubble is bursting. It's starting to burst now. One of the interesting things that's happened is this company called Supermicro. You've probably heard of them. They've been all over the news. They had an accounting scandal. They weren't able to file their financial statements on time. They were threatened with delisting, yada, yada, yada. Hindenburg Research claimed they were a Ponzi scheme and a fraud. Well, they filed their financials, and all of a sudden their stock roughly doubled over the space of a few days. But now all of a sudden they're trading it back down around from 64, they're trading back down around $35 again. And NVIDIA is closed, trading like 113 right now, but they were at 112 earlier today. That's down a lot from where they were not very long ago. Intel doesn't seem to be having such a wonderful time. They closed down in the mid-22s. And you got to wonder, all right? I mean, is it slowly sinking into people's consciousness that the human brain consumes 20 watts of power, and this much vaunted AI draws 20 kilowatts and can't outthink a human? Now, how do you make the economics work on this when you got to pay the power bill for that thing? Plus you had to pay for the hardware, plus you had to pay for the air conditioning, plus you had to, all the other stuff, right? But, I mean, when you get to something that can run on one of these little Raspberry Pis that fits in your hand, I happen to use these things for a bunch of little embedded stuff. You got it runs on one of these, let me know. All right, that's a $25 machine. I got one that runs my house. Runs literally everything in the house. That's $25. And it runs off a little USB adapter, so it uses almost no electricity either. And I think we're an awfully long way away from that being reality. So I think this is a hype-driven pile of garbage, and it's going to blow up in everybody's face. I'm just not sure exactly when.
Would you wonder though, kind of like the uh, the tech bust, excuse me, when that bubble burst, you'll see the evolution of AI, but the companies that are pumping all this money in, they're going to take the huge losses, and then they'll unveil a new platform or new solution, and then shortly thereafter there'll be a cheaper version, and all the money that they pumped into this thing just was a waste. Or
Well,
maybe
that's
not a waste
basically,
for the movement, but just a waste from the standpoint of financially, they're not going to see anything on the back end.
well, that's yeah, that's the point that I have, that I was making to these guys at the conference, is that besides the legal issues, besides the copyright issue and things like this, it has always been the case that computing, and especially storage, because what's driven all of the crazy algorithmic garbage that we deal with today and all the data mining and all that other crap, it's not the compute power, it's the fact that storage has gotten extremely cheap. Okay, today I can have a little data card that I stick in my car that has my entire music collection from every piece of music I've ever purchased, and I can listen to it on the road whenever I feel like it. Right? I've got the same kind of storage capacity in this phone. Right? The idea that I could walk around with 128 gigabytes in my pocket. Right? When I was running my internet company, 8 gigabyte drives were $1,000 a piece. 8. Okay, I needed 100 of them. I needed 100 grand, and I still didn't have as much as is in this phone. Right? But it was $100,000. That's what has driven all of this. That's not going away. That's not stopping. And if you bought the earlier versions of this stuff and you spent all this money and you're not making anything with it, when the newer one comes out, you got something that costs twice as much as the current thing. It uses twice as much energy, and it doesn't perform as well. Well, you just flushed all that money down the toilet. All right? And so that I think is what ultimately brings the bust, if you will. Do I think there will be job functions that will end up being essentially automated out of existence? Yeah, anything that doesn't require any kind of thought, anything that is completely wrote by a script. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do it now. Could I manually, for example, when my internet address changes because I get disconnected or the power goes off, I come back on, the address changes. Could I manually go and update all of the things that need to be updated so that address gets reflected in the different place? Well, of course I could. Or I could do what I actually did, which is write a little script that does it, and within 5 seconds after the machine comes up, it's all done. Okay, now you'd say, well, that's not really artificial intelligence. No, but it is machine processing of something that would otherwise be done by a human. And is that going to continue? Of course that's going to continue. I mean, we used to hand weld cars and hand bolt cars together. Now it's done by robots.
What about on the white collar side of it? Accounting, auditing, real estate. I would think be another one.
Well, yes and no. The thing about accounting is that you'd think accounting would be amenable to that, but I don't think it is. Auditing, definitely not, because the point of auditing is to essentially attest that what somebody's presented is true. How do you do the deep dive unless you've, some of that is, hey, wait a minute, that just doesn't look right. Right? I mean, anything that has a smell factor to it, it probably doesn't get automated very easily by a so-called AI.
What is your biggest concern right now? We've talked about a lot of different things.
Well, if I had to put my finger on one thing, it would be an economic dislocation as a consequence of Trump's administration trying to kick the can again, and I think he's going to do that. I said I gave him until the end of March, okay, and that was when he first got into office.
Yeah, you said that. We talked about that. You had to. What before you finish your answer to that? What do you think of the speed that they're moving right now with all this stuff?
So it's a lot of show. Okay. I've got some very real concerns about where Doji isn't going, right? They're not doing anything substantial with CMS, and yet that's where the budgetary black hole is. It's just one example. The law was changed a number of years ago. We have these things called PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers. They have an exemption essentially from investigatory looks. So they can tell Medicare, just as an example, this drug has a list price of $2,000. We got it for you for $1,800 a month. That's a good deal because you save $200. Government saved $200. The problem is that I can walk into a pharmacy and buy the same 30-day supply for $60. They're paying 30 times as much as a free market price would actually be. Now, you would think that's outright fraud because that's going through a Medicare Advantage plan, and by the way, the PBM is owned by the insurance company, so they have a pecuniary interest in doing this kind of thing. You'd think if somebody pulled something like that, they'd go to prison immediately. Well, no, because Medicare is prohibited from actually auditing this stuff, and it's got written into the statute that way. So these kinds of things are why Medicare Part D went from about $50 billion in about the time that Obamacare came in to over 100 last year. It's more than doubled. And this kind of BS is everywhere in the medical system. It all has to be stomped on because that's where the lion's share, I mean, that's $2 trillion worth of the total $6 that the government spends. Okay, if we do not take a meat axe to that section of things, and if you just try to whack people's access to medical coverage, you're going to have a revolt. So you can't do that. But what you can do is go after all of the fraud, and there's a god-awful amount of it. And so, you know, Biden made this big thing about insulin. All right, no one will pay more than $30 a month for insulin. Oh, really? Well, maybe people on Medicare won't pay more than $30. Well, what do you think the company's going to do? They're going to charge a guy who doesn't have any insurance $400. Why? Because they got to pay for all these guys at $30. All right. If you actually forced this into an open market environment, what would it actually cost to make that stuff? It's off patent. All right. What are we talking about here? $20, $25? Well, why the hell do you need Medicare to cover that if it's $25? Just pay for it. It's cheaper. All right, but once you start intertwining all these different things, what people need to understand about all this is nobody works for free. Anytime you add additional layers, anytime you add people in a building somewhere, they got to get paid. Nobody goes to work for nothing. No one. And we have to get this BS out of our heads that this system in any way cares about you. We pay, if you think about this, if the average person spends 5 minutes on this, it'll be crystal clear to them. You go into the hospital because your appendix is about to explode. Okay, so you need an operation and you need it now. All right. While you're in the hospital, they give you an infection because the doctor doesn't wash his hands. You get billed for the infection. Now, tell me why you should have to pay for something that they did to you. Why would you get why would we tolerate a system where you get the bill for the harm that someone else did to you? What, I get to ram your car and then I get to make you pay to fix my car after I'm the one that rammed you? Okay? I mean, that's the kind of stupid shit that we're doing. And nowhere was it more obvious than with COVID. They paid bonuses if you were admitted and you had a positive COVID test. So whether you actually had COVID or not, that was on your chart. Then they paid more if you got put into ICU. They paid even more if you got put on a ventilator. And then they got another bonus if you died. You think about that, Michael, that's exactly backwards, right? Isn't the goal of seeking medical care to not need it anymore, right? So shouldn't it have been, we pay you a bonus if you go into the hospital, and they do something, and you walk out on your own 2 feet within 24 hours, and you're okay. If you end up in the ICU, they actually get penalized. So they should do everything in their power to prevent that from happening. And if you die, they don't get paid at all. All right? Now, would we have tried every possible drug intervention, cheap thing that you could? You betcha. Why? Because I gave you a $5 drug and it made $20,000. Okay. I mean, hello? And if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work, I don't get paid. But, nowhere was it more on display, and that it didn't lead to an immediate revolt by the American public the way they did this still shocks me to this day. And yet this is our medical system. Every single day does the same thing.
And they haven't even started to tap into this yet to try to uncover to the public what's really going on. So,
you don't need to have it uncovered. All you got to do is take a look at any hospital bill that has an explanation of benefits.
Well, I mean, I know that, you know that, but people that write those checks out for their bills, they either don't know or they don't want to know.
They don't look. All right? I mean, you can go online and you can Google birth invoice 1960s, for example, images, and look it up and find bills from people, hospital bills, the whole thing. You'll find that it was a couple $100 to have a child. The whole deal. By the way, typically 4 or 5 days in the hospital. Not in and out the same day, okay? In the 1960s, we had epidurals. So you had an anesthesiology charge. You had a labor and delivery room. You had all those things. That included the care for the infant. It has something magical happened in the last 50 years in how human beings get pregnant and give birth? Of course not. So if you take that price and you inflate it by the CPI, it should cost about $1,000 for you to have a kid, which anybody could pay out of their pocket because they got 9 months to save it. You don't need insurance for that.
Karl, where can people find you?
Market-ticker.org. And there is usually at least one good article up there a day. And if you don't see anything new, there's a little thing to the right that says what the media doesn't want you to read. Make sure you click that one because that's where all the stuff that Google doesn't like goes, which is these days the majority of it. Because you can't have advertising against that or they'll get mad.
As always, thank you for doing this. I'm sure it won't be that long before we talk again. I mean, can you believe the speed of all this, everything that's happening right now? I mean, you and I talked a bunch at the end of last year, and I feel like we shared with, I know I had said things are just going to pick up, things are just going to move faster and faster and faster. But even this has exceeded. I never thought it'd be going this quick.
I've spent a couple of weeks skiing out of the last month, and if I hadn't been, I probably could have written 3 times as many articles. So I literally have to pick and choose what I write on right now because there's so much going on. And I've never had a time that I've sat down at the keyboard and I'm like, okay, there really isn't anything to talk about right now.
Which is incredible.
It just hasn't happened.
Which is incredible for what we're doing. Can people donate to you, Karl? Do you donate anything?
I generally do not. My daughter does some artwork, and if people really want to kick something in, buy something if something that she has. There's on the Market Ticker site. There's links that are there. And she's a starving artist, and she does work full time as well. It's it's not her only source of income. But I started doing this after when the crash was coming in 2007, and it was primarily because I had I'd done quite well during the 1990s running an internet company. I never really looked at trying to turn this into a revenue stream per se. There was a period of time when I had a trading forum that was part of the site that worked on donations, but I shut that down when Obamacare came in, because the rules that Obamacare put in place are so confiscatory if you actually earn a decent amount of money that it wasn't worth it anymore. And that's one of the things that Trump said he was going to fix in his first term. He didn't do it. So, I mean, I have a bunch of things that I would like to put on the market, like that home control software package and things like this. I have a crap ton of entrepreneurial things that I could be doing. Not until the business environment changes in this country. I don't have any need to do it, and I don't have any desire to do it. So.
Karl, as always, thanks for doing this. Look forward to our next conversation.
You bet. Take care.
Mic drop.